Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at Editor.js. This is a free block style editor and it outputs a wonderfully clean JSON output that you can see right here, which we'll be manipulating in today's video. If you're not familiar with what a block editor looks like, it's going to look something like this, probably a lot less busy, but effectively allows you to have different blocks where each block has a set of logic. So maybe you have like a code block, a paragraph block, or a list block, or you can have like a header block for like the heading of a page. So in theory, you could put this on a blank page and you could pretty much just allow the end user to create an entire page themselves. In a more reasonable example, I have here a articles scaffold. This has, if I scroll in a bit, just a title and some content. You can see here the content. If I click on this, the content has normal text and it has some bolded text. So there's really nothing interesting here that we couldn't just do with action text. It gets a little bit more interesting when you start looking at some of the other examples. It scales really well at large sizes. And here you can see that I have some regular content, and then I also have a code block here. And this code block here is actually the stimulus controller we're going to be creating for this Editor.js integration. So if I click on new article, we can see we have the option to add a title. So I'll say hello world. Or you could just come over here and next to the input, you can click on the plus, click on heading, and you can just say hello world. That'll let you add a heading of your choice. You can then add another block here if you want. So right here, we'll just click on plus, and we'll make this just some regular text. We'll come over to a lorem ipsum generator. I'll grab some lorem ipsum here, maybe like 3 paragraphs, and paste this in. So we can see here we have 1, 2, and 3 paragraphs all added in here in block form, but it still reads just like it would be a single paragraph block. I can then come down here, make another item. Let's make this a list, and I'll say, I don't know, 1, 2, and 3. So that gives us another block right here. And then down here, we can add one more block. We'll make this a code block, and I'll grab the application.html.erb file that this application is running on. So you can see here when I paste this in, we get a little scroll box. There's no syntax highlighting, but because of how I have this set up, I can show you exactly where you would need to put in the class that would get added to the code block so that you could have your syntax highlighting depending on what language you'd like. You can then come down here and click create article. We can see here we have the title of hello world, and then inside of our content we also have that fake little title we put in here. So in theory you could just make this the whole page and get rid of this top bit. So you'd have something that looks a little bit more like this. And then we have our paragraphs with our lists and our code block right here. So that's all what we're going to be integrating. Again, Editor.js is open source and free, which are two wonderful combinations. Now to make this work, we are going to have to use a little bit of Rails magic to begin with. So we're going to start with a Rails new. I'm going to scroll in a bit. We're going to name it video. We'll give it a -J of ESBuild and a -C of Bootstrap. And the reason why we're doing this specific version right here is because with ESBuild and Bootstrap, we're going to get the ability to, of course, use that Bootstrap. But more importantly, ESBuild is going to let us use Yarn. And I didn't feel like figuring out how to make this work with the import maps. You can pretty much follow all the commands. Instead of using a yarn add, you're going to use a bin/import maps space pin space and then whatever the item is. Not really my cup of tea, but if that's the way you want to go, then you are free to do so. Just be warned, if you're using import maps, sometimes it won't be able to find the dependency, and you're going to have to like specify a different like CDN to grab your stuff from. But okay, what we're going to do here, I'm just going to quickly generate the articles and the stimulus controller. So we're going to say Rails G scaffold. We have a article. The article had a title and some content of type text, I believe. It was something like that. Oh, wait, no, actually it was. Let me delete that. Rails, let me do this. Let me change this to a Rails D scaffold to get rid of it. It was a article or a content of type JSON. I don't know why I typed text. Make sure that is type JSON. If you're using Postgres, this is going to be JSON B for like boy, just as a aside, because here I'm using SQLite. It's just a JSON type, just something to be aware of. Okay, so now let's do a Rails G stimulus for our editor controller. And then let me come over to my notes and check my package.json so I know all of the stuff we're going to want to include here. So we're going to do a yarn add, and I'm going to be pasting in some stuff here. So the first thing we want is the Editor.js. And if you're not familiar, you can come over to Editor.js or Editor.js.io to the Getting Started page, and they should have a yarn command in here for @Editor.js/Editor.js. So that's the first one we're going to add. We're going to say yarn add, and then we're going to add @Editor.js/Editor.js. After that, there's a couple others that we can optionally add because each of those blocks is just a plugin. So you can pick and choose the plugins as you go. So here's our header plugin. We can also add the list plugin, and all of these are just going to be @Editor.js/ and then the name of the plugin. So @Editor.js/header, @Editor.js/list, etc. I'm going to grab the paragraph one next, and then I'm going to grab the, where is it? There should be a code one as well, right there. And for the code one specifically, I just went over to the GitHub page right here for a extension. Because all of this is open source, it's really easy to just search for what you're interested in, and you can find it that way. Okay, so that should give us our list, our header, and our paragraph, and our code. So I think that's good. Let's go ahead and run this, and this should add all of these dependencies to our package.json. Okay, cool. So now that we have that, and we have our articles, let's come over here, and let's come into our views, and our articles, and our article form. So _form.html.erb. So the first thing we have to do, as always, is we're going to have to hook up the stimulus controller. To do this, I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff in. Let me hit F11 and Control+ a couple times so you can read this. All we do is inside the form, after the model, we do a comma, data, colon, and then inside of some braces, we tell it the name of the stimulus controller. Remember when we generated it in app JavaScript controllers, we named it the stimulus editor. So the name is just editor_controller, and the name we put in here is just the first part before the underscore. So it's just editor. So that'll hook up our actual stimulus controller. Now, in terms of hooking up the content here, we have a article content. So if I come over here and we start the server, if I do a bin/dev, and I need to do a gem install foreman because I'm on a different version of Ruby. And now if we do a bin/dev, that should work, should start this up. We can come over to localhost port 3000/articles. It'll tell us we have some migrations pending. I'm going to go ahead and click Run Pending Migrations. If we click on New Article here and we hit Control-Shift-I a couple times because Brave's being weird, we can come into the editor controller in here and do a console.log and just say this is something we can see. So we can see this is connected, and our this.element is actually giving us the entire form object. So this.element is equivalent to the form itself because that's where the controller is attached to. That's just important to keep a mental note of, so that we know how to access that a bit more effortlessly. Okay, so we don't want this content because of what we put in here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty div. Now, in this case, this content has an ID of article_content. So we're actually going to keep a mental note of this. We're going to get rid of this, and we're going to replace it with a div right here that has an ID of article content. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this div and move this down. One thing that we do want to make a note of, which I'll just put in a comment, is that we want this to have the article content if it exists already. Now, that's not something we're going to be dealing with right now, but that's something that we do need to make a note of. The other thing we want to do here, because our controller is connected to our form, we need a way to tell the stimulus controller which item in here is the important one. We could use the ID, or we could use the stimulus version of that, which is just going to be a data dash and then the name of the controller, which is editor-target, and then whatever we want to call it. So in this case, I'll call this article_content. By doing this and closing my quotes, we can come into our editor, we can create a static list of targets and make this equal to the article content. You can, of course, comma separate this if you have multiple items you want to add. Now that we have that set up, we can come over here and refresh, and we won't see any errors. That's good. We can now come into our actual connect method here. So inside of the connect, the first thing we want to do is we can just create a quick little editor.js component. To do this, I'm going to say content editor is equal to a new editor.js, and it takes some braces, but we don't need to use that right now. And what we want to do then is import all of our stuff. So right now we'll just import the Editor.js. We'll come over here and refresh. You can scroll up and we can see here we're getting an error because we don't have an ID for the Editor.js. So how do we get that? Well, what we can do for that is we have the holder. So the holder, if I grab the thing here, the holder is going to be the ID of the target. So this is just going to be holder is the target element, basically. It can either be an ID or we can use, let me see here, this dot article underscore content target. Because it's a target, we have to put capital T target after it. We can save that and refresh. And now we can see I'm ready with a cute little emoji. And we can click here and we already have some items here. We can only use text, but that's still working. And I can do a test right here, create the article, and we'll see we don't have any content. The reason for that is we have to manually create the option to save it. So let's come back into edit this article and let's try to do that. Now to get the data to save, the easiest way to do this is to create a small little event listener, which we'll do right below our little constructor. And I'm going to go ahead and full screen this so you can read this. So to do this, we say this dot element, which again is our form, dot add event listener. So when the form is submitted, we want to call a method that is called save editor data. And because we want to be able to use this dot element inside of this function, we have to do a dot bind this, which will then allow us to come down here and create this, this save editor data. Now this is going to be async, just to make sure you have that there. It's going to be an async save editor data. Async, of course, means it happens asynchronously, so you don't have to wait for it. We'll go ahead and do a event.prevent default so that it doesn't submit the form right away because we want to do some other stuff. First thing we want to do is call output data or create an output data object, which is an await from this.contentEditor.save. So it saves it, gives us some output data. Once we have that data, we then need to get the form, which we can just do by saying article form is equal to this.element. Just helps improve the readability a bit. After that's done, we want to do a little bit extra, which is going to be from a article content hidden. Now, the article content hidden is a little trick that I had to use here for getting the data to load when the page initially shows up. So the way that I did this is right here. I just created a empty little form.hidden field for the content with an ID equal to article content hidden. That just allows us to use that in a cheeky little way. You'll see what that means in a little bit here. Once we have that, we can then say, all right, we have our hidden input. We now need to get the value of it, which we can call json.stringify on the output data for, or we need to set the value. And now that we've set that value, we can go ahead and do a article form.submit. So let's come in here. Let's refresh the page, say testy test, click update article. And now you can see we have some content here. This content is being sort of displayed in the form of that nice little JSON I was talking about earlier, where you can see which blocks were used, what the ID of the blocks are, what the type of the blocks are, and what the data is. So here we can see it does save it as a type of paragraph, which means we're probably going to have to import a paragraph here. Let's go ahead and let's import our paragraph real quick, just to make sure I don't forget. So we'll say import paragraph from @editor.js/paragraph. We can go ahead and save that. If we refresh, nothing will change. The reason for that is we're going to need a little bit of a helper here. So we can come over here, we can come into our app, our helpers, and our articles helper. In the articles helper, we want to create a small little method that's going to grow in size that's called display content. And we're just going to go ahead and sort of build out the whole thing here real quick, just so that we can save some time. We'll start by saying parse content equals json.parse content. We then want to do a little map. Let me hit F11. Where we say content HTML is equal to parse content blocks. So we want to go through each of these blocks because we'll have more than one paragraph, of course. We want to map each of those blocks. And then once we've done that, we want to come in here and we want to say, let's do a case. And I know people are going to start screaming because they don't like switch cases, but ask me if I care. So the first case is going to be when the block is of type paragraph. We're then going to, at the bottom, have an else, where we just make it a empty string if it doesn't match anything, and then we do an end. So after all of these ends, we then want to return a content_html.join.html safe. Because we're creating our own little HTML here, And what we want to do is inside of the p tag here, we can just say return this string when it's of type paragraph, which is just the block data inside of a p tag, just like that. We can then save this, and if we grab this display content, we can come over to the form.html.erb, or actually, sorry, we're doing the partial. So let's come over to the article partial, and inside of the article partial, we want to change the content here from article.content to be a call to display content, where the argument passed in is the article.content. Let's save this, come over here and refresh, and now we can see we have that paragraph back. We can come in here, edit this. We still don't see what's already in there, but that's fine. I'm just going to come in here and create a couple different paragraph tags and then hit update so that we can see that all of these paragraphs are working. Real quick, let's also come into our layouts and our application.html.erb. Let's do a .container.empty-5, and let's move this around the yield. This is from Bootstrap, and this is just going to allow us to make sure that everything is off the sides and the top of the page so it's a bit more readable. Okay. Now that all of that's done, how do we get this to actually display what we need it to? Well, the easiest way to do this is to come into our Editor.js so that we can see what's already in here. And what we want to do is at the top of the connect method, we want to do a, let's do it after the console log. Let's just do a const initial content is equal to this.get initial content. Once we have the initial content, we can then come into our Editor.js, and after the holder, we can say the data is going to be initial content. After that, we can then do some tools optionally, which we'll just leave blank for now. But this is where we can list the plugins that we'd like to use. Once we have that, we then need to create the get initial content method, which we can do just down here below the connect. It's a pretty simple one. Basically, all we do is we start by saying, get that hidden content field, which we can just grab by doing a get element by ID. You can, of course, create another target here and just add the target to the hidden field. You can see here where I started experimenting a bit, so the code gets a bit messier, but that's okay. It shouldn't be too much to clean this up. So what we do next is we just check if this had anything inside of it, then we want to return a JSON.parse on the value of it. If it didn't have anything inside of it, we just return an empty object, and that just gets set to the initial data, which is exactly what it would be to begin with, because initially this was just effectively this, you just weren't explicitly stating that. We can now go ahead and save this, come over here and refresh the page, and now you can see that data is being displayed. So this one little method sets this up for us, which is pretty cool because we can now use this as much as we'd like to. Now let's go ahead, let's add in some additional plugins. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and add in the header plugin and the list plugin. Let's do that right here. Say header and list. We'll put these above the p tag to keep it alphabetical. And then let's also import the code tool. And then let's make a comment here that say these are the plugins. Now we need to configure each of these, and you could find out how to do this just by searching it, but it's not too bad. We just come into our tools, and in our tools we say, all right, we want a header, and then we want a list tool, and we want to configure our paragraph tool a bit, maybe. So in our paragraph tool, we want to have a class of paragraph with a config that says inline toolbar. We'll take a look at what that means in a second. We can come down here below the paragraph tool and add the code tool as well, which is just code : code tool. You can go ahead and save all of that, come over here and refresh. Now if we click inside of the p tag, we can see we have a inline toolbar, which is what allows us to either convert this to a heading or a list, or bold the text, or even change it to a link, or we can say youtube.com/Deanin, for example, and you can change this to be a link, which if I click on this, after I update the article, we can click on it, and this should take me to the YouTube channel. I'm going to go back now because that's kind of cringy to do, but you get the idea. So now we have the ability to even do links here. Now, of course, when we save some of the other stuff, if we click edit and we do like a code block, for example, we need to make sure that if I paste in my editor controller code here and I click update, we need to make sure the code block actually works, which of course is happening inside of that helper. So let's make sure the helper accounts for all of these additional plugins. So the way that we can do that, and you'll probably want to refactor this over time because it is a lot, but what we can do is after the paragraph check, we can do one for the header, where we just put the data and the level of the header, because again, it could be like H1, H2, H3. So we just put that right after the H because of how it looks. And then we want to say, all right, here's where the text goes. And then we also have to have the closing tag, which again is going to be a H followed by whatever the level is. We can do something similar for the lists, which we can do right after this. When it's a list, we grab the list items, which is a block of data items.map. So again, we have to do a map here. And then we say for each of these items, we want to do a li for the item inside of it. And then we want to join all of this. After all of that's done, we want to create a UL with all of these list items inside of it. Simple enough. Now for the last one, which is the code block, we can say, all right, when it's a code block, we can do an escaped code, which we have to escape the HTML. If I don't do this, let me actually change it so I don't do this real quick. Let me comment this out. And let me paste this in again and get rid of this so you can see what I mean. If we don't escape the HTML, it's going to look a little weird. And I think there's a good way to show it, but all we really do is wrap this in a pre and a code block so that it looks right. We put the escaped HTML inside of it. We can come over here and refresh, and hopefully it doesn't look like this one's going to do it. So let's go ahead and let's edit this article. Let's come down here below the last code block, and let me grab the application.html.erb block. Let me change this to a code block instead. We'll make this a, we'll make this a code block. We'll paste in the application.html.erb code right here. We'll click update article. And now let me full screen this and scroll down here. And you can see right here, the application.html.erb file has like the CSRF tags and the yield tags, but the rest of the HTML isn't there because it's not being escaped properly. If we come over here and instead of just putting the raw block in, we make it this escape HTML stuff from, I think this is built into Ruby, where you can just call .escape HTML. If we do this and then we come over and we refresh, we should now see the full HTML code being displayed on the page. And of course, all of this is being saved. And, you know, every time you click edit, you can still see all of these blocks here. It's neatly formatted, etc. So yeah, hopefully this is an interesting first look. I do have a method of using active storage with this already set up. If you're interested in that, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below, as well as anything else you'd like to hear or see covered for using Editor.js. All of this stuff is heavily documented. You can come over to the docs here, like the base concepts, which sort of shows you how to do some of this stuff. It shows you how to save data. Shows you how to fill data with the saved data, which is what we did to make sure when you click edit, you can see the old data in there. Also shows you the different options you have for all of the blocks. And if at any point you're ever confused, just do what I do. Come over to ChatGPT. And what you can do is you can say, here's my issue. Here's my page as far as it is. If it's not displaying something like it wasn't right here, you can just paste that in. And somewhere up here, I don't really know if I feel like scrolling to it. It might be this. What I did was I just pasted in an entire docs page. So I said, here's the saving data docs page, which is this one right here. And all I did was I copied from the top all the way down to the bottom, pasted it in, and then I went, how do I save data? So if you're ever stuck, you can also do something like that. ChatGPT is great for that. If you give it enough context, it usually gets pretty close. And you just have to problem solve a couple small things afterwards. But yeah, hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. I do think this is a lot more useful and extendable than something like action text. I kind of cringe at the whole tricks editor thing. I think this is far, far better if you can customize something like this. And as we build out additional functionality, you'll see it's a lot easier to extend it with Rails stuff too as time goes on. You just might want to clean up the code a bit, but you know, it's a YouTube tutorial. You get what you paid for and it was free. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Hopefully this is interesting and helpful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.